watch a video all about prototyping. Okay, so during the development of Alien Isolation, the game had a pretty basic save system. It would automatically cache your data whenever you tripped invisible checkpoints, which were dotted throughout each level. It was added because it was easy to implement, simple to understand, and, in truth, because that's how saving worked in pretty much every game. Design director Gary Napper said, like any development team, we all play a lot of games and each have our favourites. Often our decisions and choices are coloured by the games we play. But as development went along, the team started to question if this save system was actually the right choice. You see, because players knew that if they died they'd only lose a couple minutes of progress, they would just waltz around the space station without a care in the world. Not ideal in a horror game. So while these checkpoints might have worked in Call of Duty and BioShock, Napper says it was not the right approach when making a game that is designed, from its core, to terrify and put people on edge. Because here's the thing, it's totally fine to take influence from other games. Many designers borrow mechanics from their favourite titles, often evolving, combining and remixing them into something new. But it's essential to understand why those mechanics work in one game before copying and pasting them into yours. How do you do that? Well, I'm Mark Brown, and this is Game Maker's Toolkit. Alright, so way back in 2004, 3 game designers got together and wrote an academic paper featuring a framework that would prove to be perfect for analysing mechanics in games. It's called MDA, and it breaks games down into 3 neat sections: mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. Mechanics describes the actual workings of the game, like the rules, the systems, what the buttons do, and all of the individual stats and numbers. For example, one mechanic could be the maximum amount of ammo the player can hold, and we could set that number really high. Then, dynamics is how the player acts and behaves in response to those mechanics. So because the player has tons of ammo, they may storm into battle and shoot wildly in the general direction of every enemy they spot. And finally, aesthetics, not to be confused with the graphics or the art style. Here, aesthetics is how the player feels when acting in that way, their emotional response. So this wild shooting could make you feel reckless, powerful, unstoppable, basically like this. To put it another way, mechanics happen in the code, dynamics happen in the player's actions, and aesthetics happen in the player's feelings. Now, unfortunately, game designers can't just go inside the player's head and directly alter their actions or feelings, but they can change the code. And because MDA describes a causal relationship, these changes will cascade down and alter the dynamics and aesthetics. For example, if we tweak that knob the other way and massively limit the player's ammo stash, that's definitely going to change the player's behaviour. Now they will act cautiously before heading into battle, or might not engage enemies at all. Every shot fired will be done with careful consideration, and more time will be spent hunting for ammo in the environment. And this will lead to completely different aesthetics, like disempowerment, fear, and caution. So this MDA framework takes mechanics and then puts them into a wider context, which asks, how do they make the player act, and how do they make the player feel? And we can use these questions to analyse the mechanics in the games we play. Like, we could ask, why does swords break in Zelda Breath of the Wild? Well, how does that change player behaviour? Maybe players will rely less on direct attacks and so spend more time sneaking past enemies or finding creative ways to ambush foes. It will certainly encourage players to use different weapons and constantly seek out new ones. It can also lead to exciting moments of drama in the middle of a fight. So far, I've used dynamics to refer to player actions, but dynamics can also be used to describe consequences that might bubble out of the game's systems. So, how does that feel? Well, it could make you feel underpowered, it could make you feel crafty and creative, and it will likely make you feel like an explorer in a world that's decaying and falling apart. If there's one hard part of this analysis process, it can be putting words to the subconscious feelings that arise when playing games. We're looking for way more than just, this game was fun. We're looking for strong, emotive feelings like, this game made me feel powerful, creative, sneaky, tense, intimidated, curious, deceitful, cooperative, flustered. So MDA lets us see game mechanics as powerful vessels for delivering emotions to players. And so when borrowing mechanics from other games, or making entirely new ones, you can pick ones with associated dynamics and aesthetics that will complement the rest of your design, and avoid ones that will clash. For instance, designer Genova Chen says that the game Flower once had a level-up system, spells you could cast, resource management, and time limitations, expected features of other video games, but they all had to go because they went against the intended emotions of relaxation, calm, and peace. Chen says, we've played so many games growing up, these bad habits form. A lot of the time we like to make things very fun, but fun doesn't always help the emotion you want to deliver. That's why it's essential to truly understand your game's vision, the overarching feeling or experience you want to give the player. Because if you know you want to make the player feel, say, scared, then you know you'll want to pick mechanics that induce feelings of fear, dread, isolation, and disempowerment. That vision could be a single statement. Subnautica was based around the phrase, thrill of the unknown, and every mechanic had to suit this idea. Resident Evil Village was built under the banner of struggle to survive, and so when playtesters hated the game's messy combat, the designers could use that phrase as, like, a lodestar to rebalance and rethink the game's mechanics. The vision could also be a fantasy that you're trying to deliver. Perhaps you want the player to feel like Batman, or an assassin, or a world leader. It could be a feeling, like how Flower tried to make you feel relaxed. Or it could be a specific experience. When making FTL, the devs said their starting point was we wanted to recreate the atmosphere of commanding a starship. With a strong vision in mind, it becomes easier to evaluate whether game mechanics are the right choice for the game you're making. And of course, it goes beyond game mechanics. All the other elements in the game, like visual style, music, animation, story, color, camera framing, and so on. Those all create aesthetics too, just without the dynamics bit. For example, Dead Space composer Jason Graves said that EA originally requested a predictable sci-fi soundtrack for the game, full of electronics and drums. After we did that first little piece of gameplay, says Graves, EA came back and said that it wasn't scary enough. The music made players feel heroic, and they wanted them to feel scared. And ultimately, I think games are most clear and coherent when absolutely everything is pointing in the same direction. Genova Chen says all the elements have to sing the same notes to make the impact strong. Perhaps the best example of this, for me, is Doom from 2016. It also had a strong vision statement, in this case, push forward combat, and pretty much everything in the game supports this statement. You can see it in the game mechanics, from the rapid movement speed, to the way you pounce on enemies to get health, to the way certain demons are told to run away from you. Every feature pushes you to race towards enemies like an unstoppable predator, and that's supported by the non-game elements like the heavy metal soundtrack, the violent animations, and the Doomslayer's visual design and personality. Of course, none of this is as easy as I'm making it sound, and there are so many other considerations to make when designing a game. For starters, a game isn't just one mechanic, but hundreds, perhaps thousands, if you want to go super granular. My interactive video essay, Platformer Toolkit, shows how a single character can be defined by dozens of distinct stats, which could change the game from feeling like Inside to feeling like Super Meat Boy. And these mechanics interact, overlap, and can even undermine each other. In the Callisto Protocol, you have very limited ammo, which is intended to make the player feel underpowered and fearful. But you also have a one-button insta-kill stealth attack with a slick animation, which can make you feel powerful and unstoppable. Also, while you can make best guesses about how a player will act in response to a mechanic, you can't know for sure until you do a lot of playtesting. Players might misunderstand, or ignore a mechanic, or do something completely unexpected. Sometimes that's a fun, emergent behaviour, like the flying cars in Rocket League, which suited the vision just fine, and so could be kept in the game. But at other times, it can create degenerate strategies that undermine your emotional goals. Going back to Alien Isolation, the automatic checkpoints meant that if you got jumped by the xenomorph, a smart strategy was to just beeline it towards the next checkpoint, get killed, and respawn in safety. Furthermore, sometimes you want to have different emotions at different times in the game, and so we'll need to change the mechanics accordingly. If the story depicts a character who starts out weak and naive, but ends the game feeling competent and powerful, how could you reflect that growth in the game mechanics? And finally, and perhaps most importantly, aesthetics are, ultimately, subjective. A scoring system might make one player feel competitive and eager to replay every level, but it could make another player feel judged and eager to get a Steam refund. Time pressure might feel fun and exhilarating to one person, but anxiety-inducing to another. And this is often related to skill and ability. Take the new Tango game, Hi-Fi Rush. It clearly wants you to feel like a rock star as you brawl along to the beat. But as someone with zero musical ability, I just felt like a bumbling idiot. At the end, I'll recommend a video about balancing a fantasy with differing player skills. So, going back to Alien Isolation, the team eventually tried a different save system, something closer to older games. Now, the game features a small number of save points that you have to operate manually. And, to make things worse, it takes a while for the save point to turn on, and for your game to actually save, giving the alien a chance to sneak up and kill you. And this new mechanic changed everything, completely altering the player's behaviours and emotions. "We were afraid," says Nappa. "If we didn't make it to the save point and successfully save, we would lose our progress. Saving became tense. Looking for a save became tense. The simple act of saving had become supportive to the game's driving factors of terror and isolation." So it's fine to borrow game mechanics, but you need to understand why they work. MDA is a powerful tool for this because it helps us to predict how a game mechanic will make players act and how that will make players feel. If those feelings complement the vision for your game, then awesome. If they clash, then they probably need to go. Because when it comes to picking, pinching, or producing game mechanics, you should listen to Shovel Knight studio Yacht Club Games, who says it depends on the game you are trying to create, the emotions you're trying to evoke, and the experience you want your players to have. Hey, thanks so much for watching. This video was originally given as a lecture at universities in London, Breda, Buden, and Skellefteå. If you'd like me to visit your school, please get in touch. You can find my email in YouTube's About section. I'm also going to GDC next month, so if you see me, say hi. For now though, click here to watch a video about delivering a specific fantasy to players of different abilities. a game a game about checking for discrepancies.
The Blood-Starved Beast slain, we are able to direct Ariana back to Uden Chapel, so send her to safety rather than spending the night. The bigoted man is super suspicious of us and would not normally want to leave his house, but after he overhears us sending Ariana to safety, he will now listen to reason. Except, he goes to the opposite place we sent him out of stubbornness, so we actually send because they can only have 3 apiece. Hence, I think it's not worthwhile to speculate on which specific Great One the umbilical cords are supposed to belong to. They could have come from 4 different infant Great Ones, but they at least came from 2. Was that interesting to anyone besides me? Alright, go down the tower again a different path to sneak into the Cathedral Ward from behind. Being a hunter is temporary employment, so I came here looking for a job, but I get no offers, just to come on from the whore on 7th Avenue. With the Blood-Starved Beast slain, we are able to direct Ariana back to Uden Chapel, so send her to safety rather than spending the night. The bigoted man is super suspicious of us and would not normally want to leave his house, but after he overhears us sending Ariana to safety, he will now listen to reason. Except, he goes to the opposite place we sent him out of stubbornness, so we actually send him to the clinic and he will end up safely in the chapel. The Black Church set is hanging out down the street. Hang on to this, cause we'll have to cosplay a church member more than once. Then pop open all the gates and get yourself access to the Grand Cathedral, then return to Uden Chapel for errands. Ariana will gift you her blood multiple times if you use it and reload between asking. Speak to the bigoted man too, but nothing he says will change your life. With the gates open, Eileen relocates to the chapel foreyard. Talk to her, and she mentions big trouble in Little Tomb of Uden. Someone's rustling up a fight. We can't warp there because the lantern is on the fritz, so walk back there instead and the blood-crazed hunter Henrik will attack. Help Eileen kill him. Eileen's quest is probably the most delicate, but doing this step saves us for a while. Head to Hunter's Dream after the fight, and Henrik's set is up for purchase for Insight. This set does come out on top for a couple of fights. Then give the small hair ornament to the doll as well, and she discovers the meaning of Christmas. Hemwick Charnel Lane can be done whenever, but difficulty-wise, it should happen now. Make sure to collect bloodshot eyeballs throughout the area, which will kick off the Hintertomb chalices for us later. The boss here is the Witches of Hemwick. For the little it matters, prioritize physical defense with Arcane second. My rifle spear with its narrow thrusts was not geometrically good at sweeping for invisible foes here. The witches drop more bloodshot eyeballs on death, and we can now collect the Rune Workshop tool. One cool thing I want to point out. The game handed us several runes throughout the preceding areas that we could not use at the time, but now that we have the workshop tool, we have a small selection. It feels nice that we get to choose which ones to use. I thought that was a nice design. Strategically, we are rewarded for continuing to put off Amelia, so let's kick off the long Chalice Dungeon journey instead. There are 10 scripted Chalice Dungeons that are part of the intended experience. Personally, I don't think a player has beaten Bloodborne without doing the Chalice Dungeons at least once. These are optional side dungeons with 3 bosses apiece. The tricky part is, we don't get to pick and choose which Chalice Dungeons we do. The game typically requires items from one dungeon in order to perform the ritual that unlocks the next, meaning we have to do all 10 if we're going to bother with any, since the best rewards, and the content that this run cares about, are in the lowest reaches. Now, you could wait until just before completing the game to run all of the Chalice Dungeons, but that has 3 big downsides. The first several Chalices you do will be a cakewalk, and you'll get really bored having to marathon back-to-back Chalice Dungeons. They are fun, and they are each flavorfully distinct, but doing multiples in a row is still a drag. Plus, you lose their benefits by waiting. If you complete Chalice Dungeons alongside main game content, you'll collect blood echoes and gems that will keep your power level high, and you'll have an easier time with the late game bosses. Bloodborne does not have a high degree of interconnectedness, but there does emerge a little synergy when you alternate making plot progress with chalice progress. There's so much to say about chalices, but much like the dungeons themselves, I will split up my discussion of them a little bit so I'm not just preaching about chalice dungeons for 10 straight minutes. Let's cover our first dungeon though. Our first chalice was dropped by the Bloodstarved Beast, so let's open it now. Thumaru, Depth 1. Layer 1's boss is a dual-wielding undead giant who deals all 3 physical types, with less of an emphasis on thrust. I would spec for blunt defense mainly, cause his slams and jumps are the likeliest to kill you. Layer 2's boss is Phoned In, just some merciless watchers who are a common dungeon enemy. These dudes are one of the exceptionally rare blunt weak bosses. See what I mean about blunt weapons having no payoffs? Layer 3 has a Watchdog of the Old Lords, and you can summon Tomb Prospector Olek to assist. My Olek just moonwalked in the middle of the arena refusing to help. Did not realize I summoned Carry Me Daddy. This Glizzy deals only physical and fire damage, and he's the only case of a boss in Bloodborne with actual immunity to a certain damage type, being fire. It is a beast, and it's weak to Serrated. Winning this fight got us the next Thumaru Chalice for later. Phew, we're done with chalices for a minute. It always feels like a breath of fresh air when I emerge from deep underground to continue playing the main game. Spend down all your cash right now, stock up on consumables, and try to leave your balance at 0. We're about to get kidnapped and we won't have the ability to recover our bloodstain easily. Just around the corner in the chapel courtyard is a kidnapper. Intentionally die to this lad and you'll wake up not at your last lantern, but in the Hypogean jail. Don the Black Church set to impersonate a healing church member, and Adela the Nun will feel comfortable speaking to us. Direct her to Uden Chapel, even though I'm not sure how to get home yet myself. Now, appreciate this puzzle with me and see if you can answer it. We're about to fight Dark Beast Parl, a big lightning beast with high bolt resistance. So why does the game give us the Tonitrus and a bunch of bolt papers as treasure right now? Items are so carefully placed in these games, it's rare to have an anti-helpful item placement. On a wheelin', on a whistle, on a way. We've got a Parl Jam to unclog. Summon Defector Ontal to help. Dark Beast Parl deals physical, blunt, and obviously bolt damage. Henrik's set is excellent defense for all those. Doing Hemwick and a Chalice dungeon in between kind of confused the timing for us, but we could have picked up Henrik's set just a few minutes ago, so I do consider that a carefully placed item. Bloodborne has a couple of tough bosses that reward you for the ability to make tall overhead swings, since their heads take good damage and get them staggered easily. Parl is one such. It's the reason to consider the angle of your swings more than simply raw DPS when choosing a weapon. Bloodborne really gives every weapon situations where it excels, and I love that about the game. Defeating Parl gives you the Spark Hunter badge. Then a shortcut door back to Old Yharnam opens up. That's perfect, cause Parl was the trigger to allow friendship with Jura. Take the shortcut ladders up and say hello to Jura. Tell him you'll spare the beasts of Old Yharnam, being careful cause it's the second dialogue option, and he gifts you the Powder Keg Hunter badge. Going back on your word now will break his trust, so use a bold hunter's mark to leave without risking having to fight any beasts. In Uden, Adela will give you her blood if you don't have any. Then head up to the Grand Cathedral to finally challenge Vicar Amelia. There are 6 numbing mists up a ladder on the way, carefully placed for Amelia who likes to heal herself, so hotbar these. Old Hunter Henriette can be brought for this fight. Amelia is very weak to fire, so use fire papers or Molotovs, both of which drop off in usefulness after this. She only deals physical for purposes of armor selection. Carefully examining all the damage types and resistances in this game has, in my opinion, introduced some new lore I wasn't really aware of. For now, note that Amelia is very resistant to arcane and blunt damages. After killing her, hold up. Do not touch that skull. Visit Hunter's Dream right now and spend your cash on consumables. Touching Lawrence's skull advances time to night, and it will be another trigger for price inflation. Messengers in the Hunter's Dream give you the Eye of a Blood Drunk Hunter for accessing the DLC now if you want to go run and grab one of the DLC weapons. Personally, I rushed Ludwig out of order because I really wanted to play this run with a church pick, so don't stress it if you see me with equipment earlier than I could have gotten it according to the script. Just know that it is safe to do the DLC at any point without locking out other content, so all the DLC weapons are on the table starting now if you have your heart set on one. But let us do Chalice Dungeon number 2. Head to Central Thumaru, a Depth 2 dungeon. Depth is just a measure of difficulty. Each Chalice Dungeon is subdivided into 3 layers. Chalice Dungeons can rarely have a 4th layer too. Each layer consists of a mini dungeon followed by a boss. These dungeons all have one main area, then they may also have a pre-level area and or a post-level area. We're unfortunately obligated to fully clear each part of each layer because we need to collect ritual materials as we go in order to afford to open subsequent chalice dungeons. So I found myself praying for each new layer that it would not have the optional pre and post areas, just so there was less dungeon for me to have to exhaust, but it felt more common than not that these bonus sections were present. So, the Central Thumaru Chalice. Layer 1's boss is a beast-possessed soul who's really just an elite enemy who got a promotion, spec for physical and fire defense. On Layer 2, find the Hintertomb Chalice as loot. Yep, a whole chalice, as a casual one piece of loot in this chalice. Yo dog. Random critical items chilling as loot in these dungeons is another reason why we gotta clear every nook and cranny. This boss is the Keeper of the Old Lords, presumably the trainer of that dog we squished in the previous dungeon. Physical and fire defense still applies, and I'll note that on offense, fire is totally a valid element to use, despite how it may appear. Note that this boss is also poisonable. How interesting that the enemies in the preceding chamber throw and drop poison knives. Carefully placed enemy, perhaps? Layer 3's boss is the Thumerian Descendant, and you can bring along Tomb Prospector Olek. You only need physical defense here, and winning gets you the next Thumaru Chalice. Do snatch up the Bone Ash set from the Insight shop afterwards. It has great physical and fire defenses, and it will be best in slot for many bosses this run. Now, we're at a good power level for the Hintertomb Chalice we just acquired, which is also depth 2, but we're going to space that out for diversity. Head back to where we killed Amelia and touch Lawrence's skull to learn the Healing Church adage and gain access to the Forbidden Woods. Alfred has relocated to intercept us on our way out. We can now ask him about corrupted Vileblood, and he gives us his quest. He needs help finding a way into Canehurst Castle. In the woods, grab the Tonsil Stone from a house near the dog pens. Then open up the Windmill shortcut and meet Walter, Master of the League. And Gymnastics. He invites us to join the League of Confederates, which we accept. Then do a bit of parkour ourselves to meet the afflicted beggar on the balcony. Eating a child? Sir, this is a Wendy's. Good thing we know of a place to send malcontents. Ship him off to Yosefka for experimentation. It's only now that we can open up the hidden back way to Yosefka's clinic through the swamp. Hey, there are carefully placed antidotes on the run into the swamp. Inside the clinic, grab the Canehurst summons mysteriously addressed to us. Then discover that Yosefka at home has been converting people into kin. Quelle horreur. She wants us to leave, but because we have already sent her a subject, she expresses her wish that we would continue sending her subjects as her accomplice. Do honor her wishes and leave without conflict. We will deal with her later. In Central Yharnam, Gilbert has more dialogue now that it's nighttime. Quite thrilling. Then in Udin, Karen will gift us sedatives. Ask for 3 more batches, then she'll leave on a quest to replenish her stash if we reload. Back in the woods, we're on that final stretch with the big Snake Hill. Grab the Deep Sea and Clear Deep Sea runes for Frenzy and Poison Resist respectively. We will rely on these a lot later. Finally, take on the Shadows of Yharnam. We can summon both Old Hunter Henrik and the younger Madara's twin for this fight. The Shadows deal mostly plain physical damage, even the snakes, plus a few fire moves. After Shadows, let's run our 3rd Chalice dungeon, Hintertomb, which is depth 2. This one is very poisonous, so hotbar antidotes and wear appropriate gear. And good thing we just picked up that Clear Deep Sea rune. Layer 1's boss is just a boar, but you can't camp his ass like a normal boar because this one knows how to kick. Layer 2's boss is an undead giant, but with different weapons from before. He deals physical and blunt in melee, and his cannon fire gives us a rare reason to care about blood damage resist. The Hintertomb Chalices are the only ones that don't have NPC summons available for their final bosses, so you're on your own against a blood-starved beast in a poisonous arena for Layer 3's boss. I suggest blowing any residual pungent blood cocktails you own. Winning this fight gets you the lower Hintertomb Chalice. I personally felt a huge difficulty leap between Depth 2 and 3 Chalice dungeons, so let's hold off on any more chalicing for a while. On to Byrgenwerth. Outside by the Foreshadowy Brainsucker is an Arcane Lake rune which reduces arcane damage. Consider this a good option against any arcane heavy bosses, which includes the imminent Rom fight. Carefully placed item. There's also a Pearl Slug in a chest on the ground floor. This will eventually go into a ritual for the Iz Chalice. Speak to Willem for insight, then if you want to treat him as Defoe, you can kill him for an item discovery rune. Do equip that rune while doing any Chalice dungeons because it will help you find blood gems. Last time I'll have to tell you this, consider buying a load of consumables. Don't delay, act now, supplies are running out. Triggering the Blood Moon after Rom is the final price increase. You can bring Henrik and Madara's twin to this fight, or just Mensis Scholar Damien. Mathematically, it's better to summon 2 than 1 helpers. The way co-op boss hit point scaling works, 3 players are each responsible for dealing 2/3 of the boss's single player hit point value, but with 2 players, they're each responsible for 3/4. Rom spiders deal only physical damage. For Rom herself, you'll mostly want arcane resist for the spells and blunt if you expect to get hit by body rolls. Do you remember a while ago I made a point of how Vicar Amelia had strong resistance to blunt and arcane? Starting with Rom, it's a strong trend in this game for the otherworldly Great One type enemies to deal blunt and arcane damage. They're hallmark damage types of the cosmos. I find it fascinating that Amelia, a high-ranking member of the Healing Church, had great blunt and arcane defenses. This wasn't relevant earlier, but I went back to check and the Cleric Beast also has elevated blunt and arcane defenses. It's almost like the transformation of man into beast came about as an evolved defense mechanism against otherworldly powers. Anyway, Rom is very weak to bolt, and she's a kin if you got any gems by now that care. Winning this fight has many transformative effects aside from the obvious Blood Moon coming out. Right away, we're warped to Yahar Ghul now that Rom is no longer able to disguise the secret moon beckoning ritual. Run forward and grab the lantern cause we don't want to have to run back here later. Then return back to the font room and get grabbed by Amygdala to warp into the Electra building. Light that lantern too, then jet. It is errand time. Ariana has been afflicted with a mysterious condition, otherwise known as pregnancy. Poor Adela has gone insane. She got kidnapped to Yahar Ghul earlier, like us, presumably for use in the Blood Moon beckoning ritual, so it checks out that she is not having a good time right now that the Blood Moon is out. Karen is back from her CVS trip with more sedatives, then we can encourage her to go scavenge once more. Reload, and she's left a BRB note. Head out the left-hand door and find her body by the well. But at least she did find another sedative for us. Note, we haven't really needed sedatives through now, but each one we can gather will be helpful eventually. Carefully placed items, sort of. Eileen is wounded, lying on the ground outside the Grand Cathedral. She warns you about the monster inside, a blood-crazed hunter who needs culling. Win this fight to complete Eileen's quest and get the Crow Hunter badge. Her armor set will now be for sale at the Bath Messengers, and it has some merit against blunt damage bosses. Check on Gilbert one more time, and find he's transformed into a beast. Put him down. Then to Music Box Girl's house. Her sister has come home, and we have bad news to deliver as we hand in the red messenger ribbon. Reload the area, and the sister can be found deceased at the bottom of the nearby ladder with the white messenger ribbon as loot. Sorry, girls. Final errand for now, hit up Yosefka's clinic. Yosefka at home is in rapture, pregnant with an old one's baby. We can kill her now to obtain another third of an umbilical cord. Okay, who feels like making some progress? Return to the lecture building and meet Patches through the door. He's got his whole plot of worshipping Amygdala, but no actual quest. Grab 2 red jelly near the door out, which are important chalice ritual materials for later. Then exit to the Nightmare Frontier. You'll want on your clear deep sea rune for poison resist and deep sea as well for frenzy resist. Antidotes and sedatives on the hotbar. This area holds 4 cold blood flower buds, which are carefully placed items, considering you're going to need them to create the Ailing Laron chalice dungeon, the chalice that the coming boss will drop. Do let Patches trick you into the pit for the content. Then prepare to fight Amygdala. She resists blunt and is weaker to the elements than the physical types. This is another boss that rewards you for the ability to make chunky overhead attacks since her head is a weak point. Hit him right between the eyes, hit him right between the eyes. On defense, I suggest speccing for blunt. All her flashy moves are physical, not arcane, but I found those easier to avoid than her plain blunt melee attacks. She drops the Ailing Laron chalice when you win. Bloodborne has a pretty big difficulty jump at this point. We've still got to go to Canehurst, and we're overdue for some chalice progress since Amygdala just dropped a depth 4 chalice and we haven't yet visited the 3s. It's easy to get caught up in the main game and forget to do some chalice content, or to get excited doing chalices and find yourself overpowered next time you touch a story boss. I found a couple of loose opinions on recommended level for chalice dungeons, but one thing I couldn't find anywhere online was a well-planned guide on how to equate chalice dungeons with main game difficulty. So we're covering new ground here. I did my best to intersperse the chalice dungeons alongside the main game in a way that spreads out the burden and also matches the difficulty level. I first tried to do it as a science, not an art. I looked up the XP gain from each of the chalice bosses and tried to collate that with main game bosses. But chalice XP leaves the main game in the dust, and this method would have us finishing the DLC with like half the chalice dungeons still left. I had to work more based on vibe. But checking Chalice XP was valuable. It was a good predictor of the Chalice Dungeon's difficulty relative to each other. We'll have parallel Chalice Dungeons available at a few points, and going by Boss XP was a good tiebreaker. Speaking of, according to Boss XP, the Lower Hintertomb dungeon comes before Lower Thumaru. This is our 4th Chalice and our first at depth 3. The Layer 1 boss is a Brain Sucker, which is just a regular enemy who got a promotion. If you're having trouble damaging it, that's because it's significantly resistant to physical and blunt damage. Try Thrust. On Layer 2, the Forgotten Madman and his escort both have very low poison resist, so spend down some of your poison knives. This is another rare case where blunt is best, but they're just dudes. It's not really an important fight to min-max. The Thumerian Elder on layer 3 deals all 3 physical types, plus relatively little fire damage despite appearances. In fact, it's very weak to fire and arcane. You can even poison this one. For finishing the lower Hintertomb Chalice, we're given the short Ritual Root Chalice, which allows us to quick search Chalice dungeons for co-op. We also unlocked the Madman set for purchase, but no pieces except the legs are really competitive. Then let's do Cainhurst before more Chalice. Head in and loot the Executioner set. With its excellent blunt and arcane defenses, this one will get some mileage. We start picking up a lot of Bloodstone chunks in Cainhurst, building on the few we picked up in the Nightmare Frontier. It's easy to get tricked into doing Cainhurst before Byrgenwerth based on when you get the Cainhurst summons, but it's a tough area. I think the prevalence of chunks is a hint to visit it after the Nightmare Frontier. The boss here is Martyr Logarius. His melee is pure physical damage, and the flashy stuff is arcane despite it being blood-colored. Logarius resists all the elements a lot, so even on an arcane build, you may do best just bringing a plain weapon and adding on a fire or bolt paper. Logarius drops the Crown of Illusions when you win. I mistook this wall for love, but put on the crown and you'll see it was a perfect illusion. Walk up the secret path to the Cainhurst throne room and meet Annalise, Queen of the Vilebloods. She is the secret star of this video. Join her covenant for the Vileblood rune and the Cainhurst badge, which unlocks the Cainhurst set. Also collect the unopened summons from the side table. Buy the Cainhurst set back in Hunter's Dream. With its strong physical defense, this set pulls a lot of weight during non-elemental bosses. Stick on the Vileblood rune because we need to collect a Blood Dreg now. We never walked the path to the right of the Grand Cathedral doors, so do that now and encounter 2 hostile NPC hunters who drop Blood Dregs if you have the Vileblood rune equipped. Then visit the Queen in Cainhurst to offer her that Blood Dreg, since, we won't get a chance for a minute. Switch back to the Impurity rune after this. We generally need Impurity on in order to see NPC bells. Back in the Cathedral Ward, hand Alfred the unopened Cainhurst summons, and he thanks us with the Wheel Hunter badge. This lets you buy the Gold Ardeo helmet, which has respectable stats and looks pretty cool, especially with Henrik's armor or the decorative Old Hunter armor. Head again to the Cainhurst throne room where Alfred has slain Annalise. Speak to him for some dialogue, then inspect the Queen's body for the queenly flesh. Check back in Alfred's original location to find him slain with the Radiance rune on his body. Seems like a Vileblood has taken revenge. Okay, we did a little main game, let's do a little Chalice. Head to Lower Thumeru, our 5th Chalice overall and our 2nd at depth 3. Layer 1 is just Watchers again. This does not need further discussion. Layer 2 has the Workshop Haze Extractor key item that we will need to make ritual materials later. The boss is another Undead Giant configuration. This one only deals physical and blunt and is weak to bolt and thrust. Deliver lightning straight to his heart, oh yeah. I got all the feels for sure. Layer 3 has Rom as the boss, which is cutely telegraphed by this single Rom spider early on in the layer. You can summon both Madman Waller and Olek for this fight. Then, this is the only dungeon we'll do that has a 4th layer. Waller and Olek are again both summonable for the boss, the Bloodletting Beast. This one deals only blunt, so if you're looking for an excuse to wear your top hat, this is it. He's weak to fire and arcane, and it resists blunt. Winning this fight gets you the Defiled Thumerian Chalice. Now, some of these Depth 3 Chalice bosses, when they're not just regular enemies who got promotions, have really been approaching endgame difficulty. Their damage output is manageable, but the hit points some of these bosses and even normal enemies have is just buffed to the moon. Don't ever feel bad about the extra levels you gain from doing Chalices, since you need every bit of DPS just to keep up. Alright, main game. Onward to Yahar Ghul, Unseen Village. Take a hidden drop in this area to reach the Upper Cathedral key. This key opens that locked door way back where we looted the Radiant Sword Hunter badge. Then there's actually not much else to cover here, so head in to fight the One Reborn. Summon Defector Antal, the same guy we had for Parl. He likes to hang out in Yahar Ghul, keeping the streets clean, I guess. One Reborn deals the standard cosmic duo of blunt and arcane damage, and resists them each in turn. He's very weak to bolt, so perhaps that's why the tiny Tonitrus is loot here, and those bolt papers and Tonitrus if we think back to our earlier Yahar Ghul visit. I wonder if there's any significance to Parl being so bolt-affine, whereas One Reborn is weak to bolt, because that sets up another example of beasts evolving to combat the cosmic horrors. After this fight, touch the Mensis caged body to warp to the lecture hall 2nd floor, light the lantern, and leave. Check up on Ariana in Uden Chapel to see that her pregnancy has advanced. That's nice. Head to Upper Cathedral Ward. The Great Lake rune gives 4% damage reduction to all types and is a very strong rune to generally just keep equipped. The Cosmic Eye Watcher badge found in this dark hallway unlocks sedatives for purchase. And visit the balcony to learn the Make Contact gesture. This is one of the only places in Bloodborne where a special item, or gesture as it were, is gained in one place but used in another, aside from keys opening whole areas. You can also loot 2 pearl slugs here, filling out the 3 that we need for the Is chalice that we're about to obtain from Ebrietas. Carefully placed item. But before Ebrietas is the Celestial Emissary. This is another classic blunt/arcane boss, and it's stupid weak to thrust and bolt. Fire is fine too, just don't use its own spells against it. Potter. Then it's cheeky of me to intersperse this between the 2 Upper Cathedral Ward bosses, but they give you a call beyond here, and I was eager to put it to use in the Ailing Loran chalice, so let's start Ailing Loran, our 6th chalice overall at depth 4. There are 4 different chalice dungeon biomes. So far we've seen Thumaru and Hintertomb. There's also this one, Ailing Loran, and Is. Thumaru is sort of the main biome with dungeons stretching from depth 1 all the way through depth 5. Hintertomb has dungeons at depths 2 and 3, Ailing Loran has dungeons at depths 4 and 5, Is only has a single dungeon at depth 5. You generally collect the ritual materials to open the first dungeon of each biome as you play the main game. Then you'll need to fully clear each layer as you go for the ritual materials to open lower dungeons within a biome. There is some crossover too. The red jellies you need for Thumaru Depth 5 are available in the Is dungeon, and the Bastards of Loran you need for Thumaru Depth 4 are available here. So while there are several flowcharts out there showing Chalice Dungeon order, they don't usually show a full picture of the dependencies when you consider ritual materials. Ailing Loran is my favorite biome to play though. In contrast with the dark and cold Chalice dungeons we've seen so far, Loran is cozy. It's brightly lit, a warm orange-brown, and a lot of the walls feel fuzzy. Layer 1 of Ailing Loran, yes I will alternate how I pronounce Loran every time, has several fire gems available throughout. It's a loose, carefully placed item since the bosses here tend to be weak to fire, but really Loran is just the best place to hunt for elemental gems. Beast-Possessed Soul is the first boss. He's very weak to fire, but everything is valid to use, even poison. You'll want to defend against physical and fire. Layer 2 has a pungent blood cocktail as loot, both carefully placed and foreshadowing Blood-Starved Beast as the layer boss. With its astronomical health pool, her final phase is a lot more dangerous than before, as you have to survive her poison aura for a long time. Consider weighing poison resist gear more highly than your normal physical defense. In Layer 3, make sure to collect 4 Bastards of Loran, a rare ritual ingredient. Then, Abhorrent Beast is the boss, and we can bring along Old Hunter Vitus or Beastclaw Joseph. These 2 men have 2 summons apiece, and they're exclusive with each other, so we'll bring one of them now and the other guy next time. Winning this fight gives us our first Depth 5 Chalice, Lower Ailing Loran. Alright, time for Ebrietas. This was my hardest fight in my first playthrough, tailed by Logarius, but both of those were miles ahead of 3rd place, so I've been a little trepid about facing her this time. Except, now I have the power of research on my side. All her fancy attacks deal arcane damage, even though visually it looks like blood. Her other attacks are physical and blunt, but prioritize blunt since these are the attacks that can actually kill you, such as her charge and slams. Ebrietas is kin if you have gems that give you an edge there. Otherwise, use thrust and bolt, which she's very weak to. You can bring along Mensis Scholar Damien to help. Defeating her gains us the Is Chalice, our second Depth 5 Chalice. After the fight, inspect the altar in her arena. Offer the queenly flesh here to turn back time and revive Queen Annalise. We will be revisiting the queen later, but for now, just head to the lecture building, 2nd floor. This is like the 4th time I've called out sedatives, but there's a bundle of 6 on the floor here, carefully placed for Mensis in a minute. Also, finally meet Patches here face to face. He goes off about Amygdala some more, gives us a rune no matter how we answer, then we're done with him. You will want every point of frenzy resistance you can muster for the Nightmare of Mensis. Besides the glowing brain of Mensis, there are several Winter Lantern enemies here who will frenzy you. Start by passing through Australia and climb the castle halfway to fight Mikolash. No, not Mikolash, Mikolash. He only deals arcane damage, and any damage type you want to use on offense is fine. There are various ways to cheese him, but for the intended experience, you ought to just chase him down for a while and have a showdown. After beating Mikolash, we have access to the infant great one Murgo, but she's gone tomorrow. All that we want is another baby. Because Mikolash's fight was the trigger for Ariana to give birth. Head down below Udin Chapel and meet Ariana's unusual baby. Good thing we don't live in a glass house, cause we gotta stone this thing to death. For value. Killing the worm baby gets us our third of an umbilical cord, but it sadly causes the mother's death too. At least we gain her pretty shoes. With that sad errand behind us, return to the Nightmare of Mensis and continue up the castle. Jump off an elevator for a secret passage full of Winter Lantern enemies, the ultimate test of our frenzy resistance, and a good sink for those sedatives. This path leads you to a lever where you can drop down the nasty Brain of Mensis creature. Later, join it down in the abyss and hold the make contact gesture for half a minute until it grants you a rune. Then kill the brain for a living string. What a terrible thing to lose. Continue climbing the castle. Murgo's wet nurse waits at the top. I was so juiced from doing Chalice dungeons, I've been able to be real sloppy on these latter story bosses, and this one is no different. An easy first try. On defense, protect against physical and thrust damage. On offense, avoid blunt. But the Wet Nurse was just a protector. Our real target is the Infant Great One, Murgo. Topple the baby's pram, then silence. Sirens. It all went down like our nightmare the night before. We finally dispelled the Nightmare of Mensis and achieved the objective Gehrman and his patron had in mind for us. For winning here, we get our fourth and final third of an umbilical cord. And this could be it. We could be done with the game right now. But I know that's not what y'all wanted. There's a whole DLC to touch and 2 optional final bosses. And lucky us, 4 more Chalice dungeons. So I'll make you a deal. Stick with me through 4 more Chalices interspersed with the DLC bosses, and I will fight the final 2 main game bosses instead of taking the peaceful ending, even though I prefer that ending canonically. Let's cover our 7th Chalice dungeon right now, the Depth 4 Defiled Thumuru dungeon. For this dungeon, your character's max HP is cut in half. Hopefully you've soft capped at 50 vitality by now, or this will be a rough go. I also recommend, if you have any economic or quality of life runes equipped, that you swap them out for Clockwise Metamorphosis for hit points, Great Lake for damage reduction, and Lake for physical damage reduction. The level parts of this dungeon are not so bad as long as you're careful, but the bosses can be brutal thanks to the hit point reduction. Layer 1 starts off with a reprised Keeper of the Old Lords, who is mercifully not a problem. Layer 2 is a reprised Watchdog of the Old Lords. This one can be tough with half health. But to help you out, they give us an NPC summon even though this is not the final layer of the dungeon. Grab Queen Killer to help you out in this fight. Queen Killer is an odd NPC we have not seen until now. He wants one thing, to kill Queen Yharnam. We'll see him again for the 3rd layer of this dungeon as well as the eventual Queen fight in the final Chalice dungeon. I think he's a hilarious character, wearing the gold Ardeo and no shirt, wielding a cannon in one hand and a wagon wheel in the other. Miyazaki was definitely taking the piss with Queen Killer. We're happy to give him a hand here in reaching his goals. Layer 3 is another rough fight, this time against Amygdala. You can bring Queen Killer and Madman Waller for this fight, but after dying immediately a few times figuring out my strategy, I ended up winning on a recon attempt without even bringing help. Amygdala's slams can easily one-shot you here, but with stacked blunt resistance, you should be okay against most other attacks. All the guides for Amygdala will tell you to go for arms and headshots, but I honestly had the most success just slicing her highly damage-resistant tail, only sneaking in headshots when she readjusts after jump attacks. For beating Amygdala at half health, our prize is the final Chalice, Great Thumuru Ihil. Only the Depth 5 Chalices remain, and they are each a full tier of difficulty above the DLC. So let's get into the DLC now, and we can intersperse the Depth 5 Chalices. It's weird to me that fighting Ludwig will be a relief. Doing the Chalice dungeons really gives you an appreciation for the normal bosses. Get chewed up, spit out, and booed off stage by Amygdala outside the Udin Chapel to wake up in the Hunter's Nightmare. If you had removed the Impurity Covenant rune for some reason, make sure it's back on now. Throughout this area are strewn pieces of the old Hunter and Constable sets. Try to collect them because they have pretty strong stat lines and they will help with endgame content. Proceed through the Nightmare, stopping in the Grand Cathedral for the Eye Pendant, and fight this random beast-transformed Hunter for the Firing Hammer badge. Eventually, circle back to open the side door of the initial chapel and meet Simon. Tell him you're interested in the Nightmare. Simon is a hunter, possibly with ties to Bergenworth, who seems to be a scholar of the First Sin. The earliest hunters committed an atrocity in a nearby fishing hamlet, and it's Simon's quest, now ours, to either verify it for himself or put things right. Faced with the Ludwig fight, we could go in right now, summoning both the younger Madaris twin and Master Valter. Or we could put that on hold and ruin the Madaris summon in exchange for beefing up Valter. Obviously we're doing that. See, you should have 3 vermin by now, dropped by the 3 red-eyed hunter NPCs in the first part of this DLC. We need 5 of those. So if you haven't been doing co-op, go help some people out to earn 2 more. I recommend using the Short Root Ritual Chalice to quick search people beckoning help in their Chalice dungeons. The latter chalices are brutal and your help will surely be appreciated. Or just create the next chalice yourself and beckon help twice. You still get vermin when a Confederate helps you kill your boss. With 5 vermin in hand, revisit Valter in the Forbidden Woods. Crush 1 vermin, then speak to him for some dialogue. Crush a second, and he has more to say. Crush 3, 4, and 5, and exhaust his dialogue, then reload. His goofy one-eyed bucket helmet is on the floor now, and we've evolved him like a Pokemon into a more powerful form when summoned. Unfortunately, doing Valter's quest made the younger Madaris twin hostile, so we've ruined that summon even if we leave him alive. Back in the Hunter's Nightmare, Valter, Master of the League, has turned into Valter Beast Eater. Hope he's hungry for horse. Let's take on Ludwig the Accursed. Ludwig deals blunt and arcane damage, akin to the Great Ones. The only damage type with an edge against him is fire. Note his arcane defense doubles in phase 2, so if you're here to spam Call Beyond, you actually might want to blow those early on. There's a little bloody dude in the corpse piles decorating Ludwig's arena who is highly likely to die during the fight, but if he somehow survives, you can talk to him. All he does is laugh. Sadly, Ludwig killed him in my game. After the fight, put on an entire set of Healing Church affiliated armor, and Ludwig's head has special dialogue. He sees we're in the church he founded and wonders if the organization is faring well these days. With Vicar Amelia dead, the high-ranking member is probably one of those random We Happy Few enemies, so no, the Healing Church is not doing so hot. That gets Ludwig to acknowledge he has become a beast, which he had refused to see. Reload the area, and Simon has slain the head for us. Speak to him for Ludwig's sword and more encouragement to uncover the nightmare's secret. Advance to the cells, and we hear Yamamura muttering through his cell door. Then approach Brador's cell and speak to him through his door. Brador is a Healing Church assassin hired to keep the secret of the nightmare. He's antithesis to Simon and ourselves. We can answer him either way when he asks if we hear the bell. He will try to kill us all the same. In the next chamber, cause the elevator to leave without you and grab Lawrence's skull from the lower platform, which allows fighting Vicar Lawrence as a boss later. Then ride the elevator up for real and light the research hall lantern. We're having so much fun Scooby-Dooing our way through this nightmare mystery, but let me stop you right there for a chalice dungeon. You promised. The Great Is Chalice is our 8th chalice. It's by far the easiest depth 5 chalice, and we have to do it before Thumeru Ihel anyway for materials. The Is biome is gorgeous, so it's a nice change of pace now that chalice dungeons are getting a bit stale. It's easy to see because everything shimmers with a blue-green celestial glow. The Layer 1 boss here is another brainsucker who is still negligible as long as you're thrusting. Layer 2 is also a joke, just a celestial emissary. This one doesn't even have his backup dancers. Layer 3 is a little more interesting. 2 red jellies are treasure here, which we need for the Thumeru Ihel ritual. Then this layer has the game's only summon sign for Tomb Prospector Gremia, so bring her along to fight Ebrietas. Same as before, max out your blunt and arcane defenses and thrust her down. That was nice and quick. Let's reward ourselves with a very cool area in the DLC. Enter the research hall and begin climbing all up and down the place. Collect the decorative old hunter armor and pants, which have top-notch physical defenses. Also get the enlarged head helmet, which has low defenses except for blunt and arcane. It's nasty, but this is in fact a carefully placed item for the next boss. Beware you don't lose your patience with this patient. She's named Adeline, and she's friendly. Adeline wants brain fluid to help her mind stay connected to some greater being. Fortunately, there are 2 brain fluids available in the area. One on a central landing and one up in the rafters. Hand her one and she gifts us her blood. Well, tells us to extract it, since she's a little tied up. Reload the area 3 times and she will accept the second brain fluid, then gift us the balcony key. If we use this key to head outside, we get the actual best arcane build payoff. The black sky eye took the needle to my eye, sucked out all its glow. Grab the underground cell key from a hidden room and we can head backwards to Yamamura's cell. Open the door and kill him for his armor set and to enable him as a summon. Hopefully Simon has joined you by now at the research hall lantern for more dialogue. Reload the area if he's still missing. He gets straight to the point, telling us we must climb the tower and kill Lady Maria. Can do. Then it might take a few reloads depending on if you've died, but Adeline will eventually have deformed into just a stuffed garbage bag, and she's still hungry for brain fluid. It's nasty, but we can kill her for her own brain fluid and feed it back to her Ray Liotta style, and she thanks us with the Milkweed Carol rune. Now we're ready to fight the living failures. Yamamura is summonable to help here, and it's possible to keep up with the bosses spawning for a while if you gang up on them with Yamamura. This is yet another blunt/arcane dealing boss who is weak to thrust. Lady Maria comes immediately after this fight, so this is one time we won't split things up with chalices.
A corpse should be left well alone.
I love the double entendre here. Don't mess with corpses, both referring to Maria's dormant form we messed with, and the original sin of the hunters butchering the corpse of Kos. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower deals physical and thrust damage phase 1. Her melee attacks convert entirely to blood damage in phase 2, and blood plus fire for phase 3. Blood is probably the most relevant defense to spec for. I love that the Cainhurst set meets our criteria quite well, since Lady Maria herself is of Cainhurst lineage. Very few of the game's tough bosses are weak to arcane, but it's a pretty good element to employ here, along with Bolt. After winning, warp back to Hunter's Dream, where Maria's armor set is for sale, but it's pretty bad. For the defenses it's good in, the Cainhurst set just eclipses it. And then open up Lower Ailing Loran, our 9th chalice overall and our 2nd at depth 5. Layer 1's boss is a Loran Silverbeast. He has high resistances to everything except arcane, fire, and rapid poison if you were looking for a chance to bleed out a boss. His melee attacks are pure physical, and he can cast fire and bolt stuff, but these moves are more easily avoided. Layer 2's boss is an abhorrent beast. He's very weak to slow poison, so spend down your poison daggers throughout the fight to keep poison online. Every damage type besides bolt is fine to use. Now, despite appearing bolty, his attacks only deal physical and blunt damage, so tank up. And Layer 3 has a Laron Dark Beast, who's a beefed up Parl. This is the second time we have to choose between Joseph and Vitus, so take the one who got left out before. There's not really any important loot for winning this one. So if there's one preset Chalice dungeon you can skip, it would be lower Ailing Laron. I just had to do it for the content. Or if you say didn't have the ritual materials to open the other depth 5 chalices, you may as well run this one to acquire those. Before continuing with the story, put on the Milkweed Carol rune. Your head will take on a silly appearance. Then return to the Astral Clock Tower and venture forth into the final DLC area, the Fishing Hamlet. On the way in, a fishy priest is muttering curses on the church, who butchered Koss and the villagers so long ago. With the Milkweed rune on, he gifts us the Accursed Brew, a little treat for my arcane boys out there. Brew does a little less than double the damage of Black Sky Eye for double the bullet cost, but Brew has an arcing projectile. Black Sky has trouble hitting enemies who are low to the ground, but Brew covers that blind spot. Proceed through the residential part of the hamlet, making sure to hit a hard left up this cliff path to open a shortcut. You can grab the Harrowed armor set up here, which is what Simon wears. It's perfect for fighting Orphan with its high physical and arcane defenses across all slots. Carefully placed item for sure. Now, Bloodborne has been handing us blue elixirs all throughout the game, which turn your character into John Cena, and there haven't really been meaningful places to use those until now. Souls games usually give you a few strategic options for an area like this, but here we're simply forced to head straight up through this canyon while ranged projectiles pour on us. But a blue elixir can help you reach the caster at the back with less pain and go from there. Once you reach the lighthouse hut, find Simon lying on the floor. He's come undone. Brador, the church assassin, has gotten to him. Simon hands us the underground cell inner chamber key with his last breath, so let's go avenge our friend. But more importantly, take the chance to remove the stupid Milkweed rune. Then head to Brador's cell. On the way there, we hear the toll of the silent bell, and Brador invades in the hallway. Kill him, open his cell, then kill him. Now, I played it this way to roleplay revenge for Simon, but if you'd prefer to let Brador invade you throughout the hamlet, be my guest. You get his gear either way. Continuing past the lighthouse hut, we reach the industrial area of the hamlet. Enemies from this point on have very high bolt resistance, which I find odd since all of the Old One affiliated enemies so far have been bolt weak. Perhaps the bolt affinity of the fishmen is intended to tie them, and perhaps even Koss herself, closer to humanity, or at least this planet.